Hello everyone, it's Thursday and you're watching Within the Frame. I'm Kim Bo-kyung. On the shores of a vast blue lake in Minnesota, a very special place invites those interested in Korean language and culture. Called 숲속의 호수, this Korean language enclave within the 콘코디아 language villages has been attracting young people looking to learn more about Korea. Since it was founded in 1999, this Korean immersive village has been over-enrolled thanks to the rising popularity of Korean content and culture. What unique aspects of the Korean language are participants in the program seeing? And what support would the village need to get more students interested in Korean culture? For this, we invite Professor Daphna Zhu at Stanford University and the Dean in charge of the Korean Language Village. Welcome, Professor.
Thank you so much. It's such a pleasure to be here.
Thank you for being here. And we also have Emily Schwab, a student at Stanford University. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. Now, first question to our professor. So, the Korean Language Village was founded in 1999. Now, what was the reason behind such a foundation at that time?
So Concordia Language Villages is a nonprofit organization that was established in 1961. And at the time, the idea behind this program was raised by very progressive language instructors who realized that if you bring together language learning and the great outdoors, magical things will happen. And so this program was founded, and it started with a bunch of different languages, Norwegian and French and Spanish and Chinese and Japanese. And Korean was a relatively late newcomer to this in 1999. The reason that Korean came when it did was that there was kind of a realization that there was an audience, an interest in learning Korean in the United States that wasn't quite being met by the Hangul Hakyos and other Korean language organizations. Remember, in 1999, this is before Hallyu.
Right.
So it wasn't that there was the Hallyu push behind it, but what the main audience for learning Korean at the time were actually the relatively large number of Korean adoptees that can be found all over the United States, but very interestingly, quite concentrated in the Midwest, in the area of Minnesota. And so this kind of perfect convergence of language, teaching, great outdoors, and a realization that there are young people from all over the country with a Korean heritage background that didn't quite find their place to learn Korean in Hangul Hakyo, that made it important to start the Korean Language Village in the woods in 1999.
Right, and now many Koreans who do not, many Americans who do not have any relationship to Korean is now visiting the summer campsite, right?
Yeah, that's a really great point, is that when we started in 1999, I would say probably around 80% of our villagers were Korean adoptees or had some kind of heritage background. Today, probably 80% of our villagers, I would say 70 to 80% are what we call non-heritage learners. They're learners with no Korean heritage background, no Korean language background. They learn Korean because they're so interested in Korea, and they're interested in Korea largely because of the impact of Hallyu.
That's good to hear. Now, Professor, as far as I know, Professor Ross King was the founding dean of the village, and now you're in charge of the summer campsite, right?
That's correct.
Right. Now, how did you become interested in Korean language and culture, and why did you decide to take up this role as the second dean?
So my story with Korea is I came to Korea in 1993, and I came to Korea. I was born in New York, but I was raised in Israel. And when I was a young person in Jerusalem in the early 80s, there was a kind of the popularity of martial arts films. So the kind of early soft power of martial arts. And so I became really keen on Taekwondo. I did Taekwondo quite seriously. And so in the early 90s, as an Israeli, I also went to the army. I'd finished my army service. And I decided to come to Korea to get my black belt in Taekwondo and also learn the Korean language. So that's how I got interested in Korea. I learned the language. I got my black belt here. I'm a samdan.
Wow.
But I also continued learning the language, and then decided to do a master's and then a PhD in Korean literature. So my passion is Korean literature and culture more broadly. the way I became dean, in 1999 was the year of the founding of the village, as you pointed out. That was the year that I started my master's program under Professor Ross King. He was my master's and then PhD advisor. And so when I applied to the University of British Columbia to do my master's, Professor King wrote to me and he said, I will take you as a student, but you should know I'm starting this program in the woods of Minnesota. Would you be interested? And I said, and he asked me to come on as a taekwondo instructor. It's Korean immersion. You have to speak Korean all the time and teach taekwondo. And I said, yeah, that sounds like super fun. So that's how I started my involvement in the village. And I was immediately hooked. I love this program. I think it changes lives in a really impactful way. And so about 9 years ago, when Professor King decided to change his roles a little bit, go a little bit more to the background, I took over as dean.
It's so interesting how your interest in Taekwondo led you to become the dean of the Korean Immersive Village. Now, Emily, I'd like to know more about you. So you participated in this immersive Korean language village, right?
Yes.
All right. Now, how did you first become interested in Korean culture and language, and why did you apply for the program?
So I originally got into K-pop when I was in about middle school, so I was impacted by the Hallyu wave. Like Professor was saying, I'm a non-heritage learner. So I started to know about the language villages because I attended actually the German language village for several years before I got into K-pop. But once I found the Korean language through K-pop, I decided to make the switch and I started attending the Korean language village.
Really?
Out of an interest for learning a new language.
So your first interest was in German?
Yes.
Right? But now you switched to Korean?
Yes.
Interesting. Now, Emily, could you give us details about the program? I mean, what do the students there get to learn and get to know about?
Yeah, so kind of day to day, there are Korean classes that students get to take so that they can learn more Korean grammar, they learn more vocabulary, things like that in a more formal setting. But there's also choice activities that include Korean cultural things like samulnori, kayagum, and things like that, but also sort of traditional camp activities like art and sports and swimming and canoeing and other things for kids to enjoy. And then of course we eat Korean food, which is I think a very special thing to be able to do in the woods of Minnesota. So that's kind of day to day. We have these special classes, activities, and foods that we get to eat, which creates that all immersive experience.
Among all those activities, what was your favorite?
My favorite, so there was a K-pop dance class that students can get to take. And so that is always very fun. It's always very popular, especially among people who gained an interest in learning Korean from K-pop. So I would say my favorite was learning the K-pop dances.
Right, I see. Now, as Emily pointed out, this village is an immersive one. And Professor, I heard participants there get to stay in the cabins named after Korean regions, both the south and the north, and that they need to use the Korean won when they are buying goods at the village market. Now, why do you believe such immersion is so important when you're learning a language?
Well, if you think about it, we learn languages as children the most natural way is in immersion, right? We hear it around us. We hear all different contexts. Sometimes we hear grown-ups speaking using words that we don't understand. But that's how kind of the natural way of learning language is to hear it in all the time and in all these different situations and contexts. And so it makes sense that immersion can really stimulate and bring all the senses together. So the trick is to convince the staff who come. I hire staff every summer from Korea and all from the United States. I hire staff that can speak fluent Korean. I also hire staff that are non-native, like Emily her Korean name is Nagyang. Nagyang is also a staff member now. She was a villager before, now she's a staff member. So I also hire staff who are themselves in process of learning Korean. And the trick is sometimes to convince staff that immersion works, that they don't have to translate. They don't have to, if kids don't understand what they're saying, they don't have to immediately translate for them in English. If everyone stays in Korean, then students learn from context, from walking around the village. Oh, this means 주세요. This means, 맛있어. 화장실 어디예요? 화장실 가도 돼요. That's the first survival language that they learn. And so, we create the opportunities for students, or for our villagers. We don't call them students because it's not a school, it's a village. So we give our villagers opportunities to learn and immediately go out into the field and use what they've learned. So they can produce, we encourage them to speak a lot, to ask questions. We do a lot of singing. So we try to give them like all these sensory opportunities and experiences to reinforce their language learning.
Right, I can definitely see why this such an immersive experience is so important when learning a language. Now, Emily, that being said, were there any interesting rules to follow, or was there any memorable part of the immersive experience?
Yeah, so because it's in the woods of Minnesota, there's naturally rules to follow about safety and different plants to avoid, and when you're in the water, different safety rules. But that felt pretty standard for a summer camp. And I suppose my favorite part about it was being in that nature and immersive setting, because it allows you, like the professor said, to practice the language that you learn every day. And so when I would learn something new, I would immediately be able to go and speak to a staff member or a fellow villager and use that grammar. And I think that's really special, and it really helps people improve their language ability in a very short amount of time.
Right. I wish I were also the participant of the village. Now, Professor Zur, usually how many students apply for the program, and is there any selection process?
So our enrollments have really exploded, as you can imagine, since since the early 2000s. I mean, we had a bit of a dip in enrollments during the financial crisis in the United States in the late 2000s. But since 2010, 2011, the enrollments have only been growing. Our problem isn't enrollments, it's space. So we have more enrollments than space that we can accommodate. There is no selection process. Whoever wants to join our program, as long as they can register early enough. I've heard some kids say that it's harder to get a space at Hosu'ga Hosu than it is to get a BTS ticket. I don't know that that's exactly true, but it is really popular, and our villagers who want to come and learn Korean, usually if they don't register immediately when the registration season opens, they might end up on waiting lists for a very long time. So our only limitations are the number of free beds that we have to accommodate the number of villagers who want to learn Korean.
Well, we are going to talk about the support the village needs later on, but Professor, what impact is the so-called Korean wave having on the number of enrollments and to the interest of students enrolled there?
Well, the impact is huge. I mean, we have seen interest in Korean language specifically just going through the roof. Enrollments are sky high, record high, particularly at the college level, while many foreign languages are actually decreasing in enrollments or staying stagnant. Korean is probably the #1 language that continues to grow. There are many programs all over the country, all over the United States and North America in general, and probably other places in the world as well, where they cannot meet the demand for Korean language. So that is, there's empirical data to back that up. So that's the impact of Hallyu. If you're asking about the impact of having a program like this on our villagers, I'm an example of someone who came to Korea because of the influence of soft power. I love martial arts, decided to take on Taekwondo, came to Korea, and became a kind of lifelong supporter and lover and educator for young people. So people like me, there's so many young people who would could potentially become ambassadors, become do this kind of public diplomacy, build bridges between Korea and the world. And learning language is, I think, one of the most important parts of that. Once you start to learn a language, Korea, kind of comes into your heart. And that is something that continues to play a role, I think, in many of our villagers' lives going forward. So someone like Nagyang, like Emily sitting here, came as a villager, started learning Korean. All of a sudden, she also got into Stanford. She's one of my students at Stanford, and is now here on a seminar with me. And many of our villagers start with an interest in language, and then they pursue that in college and also later in their careers.
It's so good to hear how the Korea's soft power is letting more foreigners to get interested in Korean language and, of course, its culture. Now, Emily, I'd like to talk about the uniqueness of Korean language. So, for your point of view, as a foreign student who is learning this East Asian languages and culture, what do you believe is most unique about Korean language?
So for Korean language, for me, what really drew me in was the writing system. And what I found most interesting and unique is the sort of identity that is tied with the writing system, Hangul, and sort of its creation to make the language more accessible, which in turn I think has not only made the language more accessible for Korean speakers, but also now international speakers who are looking to learn. And yeah, learning about how Korean identity and history and the preservation of language is so very important makes the language even more unique and interesting.
But Emily, it's good to hear that, but I'm a native speaker, but sometimes it's even hard for me to learn the Korean language and to be exactly correct. So for foreigners, it could be much more difficult to learn, right? So how do students view the difficulty of learning this Korean language, and what incentive do you believe should be in place for them to continue their learning?
Yeah, so as like a native English speaker, Korean is very, very different structurally and grammatically from English, which can be a daunting challenge at first. But I think more and more students are willing to take on that challenge because of the growing popularity of Korean media and the Hallyu wave. That interest in the language is growing, and so people are more and more willing to stick with it because they like it, because they consume media, music, things like that, that surround them with the language, and so it becomes a fun challenge rather than a daunting one. And so I think in terms of motivation for students, looking at Korea from the soft power perspective, with its growing power in the global scene, I think that's another huge motivator for students to learn as it becomes more and more of an international power for the future.
I see your point. Now, a professor, for Korean to become a global language, I assume more support would be needed for this village. How is the current situation, and what support should be in place?
Yeah, that's a really great question. I want to follow up on something that Emily just said, which is that it is true that with the popularity of Hallyu, more and more young people are drawn to learn Korean. They're willing to stick it out, through tough times and really get deeper and deeper. But it is also, as you pointed out, a challenge, a challenging language, and we see that in higher education. So, as I said, there are a lot of pressure on enrollments in Korean language. This enrollments actually taper down after second or third year of Korean, and that's because of what you just said, that the difficulty of the language, the number of hours, there is a measure of the language difficulty that is available on the Defense Foreign Defense Institute in the United States that shows that to get to a level of fluency in Korean that is equivalent to a level of fluency, say, in French, you need roughly 4 times the number of hours, 4 times the amount of investment in that language in order to be able to do the same thing. So that's a tremendous amount of investment. And it's not that, not an investment that anyone can make.
Right.
Time is also resources, it's money, it's, all kinds of things that need to happen in order to help students stick through and continue their learning. And this is where the investment in Korean language education really is crucial. So, Hallyu is, here, and it is not going away, and, all of that is wonderful. But to get students to learn Korean and to stick with Korean, you really need that long-term investment. And this is something that we really like to see more effort, both on the part of perhaps the Korean government and also, individuals or corporations giving back, saying, okay, Hallyu, we've done so well, we've got so many new people coming in, being interested. Maybe it's time, not maybe, I think it is time for these corporations to give back, to say, okay, we're going to support your learning. So how can they do that? Korean language education needs support. The example that we're here to talk about, 숲속의 호수, we, until this year, have been operating out of the Russian language village because we did not have our own space. We didn't have our own architecture. We didn't have our own space. So we've been limited we're using this, other space to teach our language. We have tremendous support from Kenny Park, from Simone Corporation here in Korea that got us started on our dream of moving into our own space, the Korean language village, but we still have a long way to go. So the more people take an interest, they can support us either by helping us build the few buildings that we still need to build in order to complete our construction, but also scholarships for our villagers. You asked me before, what are the limiting factors? Is there a selection process? These programs are by comparison with other summer residential programs, they're not wildly expensive, but they do cost money. And our goal is to always offer space to any child who wants to learn Korean. So we are greatly in need of scholarship support, support of, like I said, the capital project of building these buildings so that we can finally expand and take as many learners as we can. This past summer, 2023, I had to turn away over 20 villagers who wanted to learn Korean. Those are 20 people, those are missed opportunities for building more bridges, building future ambassadors, this 친한파, right? American and international children. We get children from outside of the country as well, who we teach language and teach them, we train them to be courageous global citizens, and they set the stage for them to become lifelong learners and take an interest in Korea. So those are missed opportunities, and we need that support by helping us build the Korean language village and helping us with scholarships. And there are other ways as well of helping. It's a nonprofit organization. For those who are in the United States, there are tax benefits for those who can donate. We welcome any amount, and we really need support of people who see the value in this kind of project.
I can definitely see the reason why the village needs support, and I really hope such support could be given. But Professor, you talked about 친한파, right? What effect could we expect by having more students get to know about Korean language and get to know about Korean culture? Could you give us more details?
Well, I think, every villager that comes to spend 2 or 4 weeks with us and works with Korean staff and sings Korean songs and eats Korean food and does all of this in the supportive environment that we provide, every child will never forget the experience that they have. And from that moment on, Korean will take some place in their heart. It may be small, it may be that villager will grow up and just look at the news and kind of every time Korea comes up, think about, Korea's perspective on the world, its place on the global stage. Some villagers will continue their language learning and go on to major in it in college. Some will go on to have corporate or other kinds of jobs and will have a kind of special relationship with Korea. Some will become professors. But every single villager will have had an experience, a positive experience with Korea, will have learned some language. I mean, language is the basis of our human experience. It's the way that we connect with others. And that experience will never be taken away. And so to me, in my mind, there is no question that this kind of program is really crucial to building bridges and breaking down walls in our world today.
Right, I see. Well, the talk was so interesting today, but unfortunately, this is all the time we have for today's edition. And it was so great to hear from someone who is interested in Korean language and culture. And on behalf of Koreans, I'm so thankful for both of our guests to show continuing support on Korean culture and language. Thank you. We really appreciate it, Professor and Emily, for your time and insight. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. 감사합니다.
Thank you. All right, that's all for Within the Frame tonight. We'll be back tomorrow with more in-depth stories. Thank you for watching and goodbye.